So welcome everyone to our first session of the Stanford Fellowship Coaching Program. And this is the second full academic year that we've done this, as well as an original pilot that we started the year before that for 3 months, right when COVID started. So you have the benefit, this group, of what we learned last year and what we learned in the pilot. And so it's getting better and better every year, which is fantastic. So I am Dr. Jesse Mahoney. I am a board certified pediatrician, and I went to Dartmouth for undergrad and UCSF for medical school. And then I worked at Kaiser, the Permanente Medical Group, and I'm based in San Francisco physically, even though on Zoom we could be anywhere. So I worked at Kaiser TPMG in San Francisco and South San Francisco for 20 years. And I recently actually went full-time into physician coaching, and I'll tell you a little bit about my story there. I still am a volunteer clinical professor at UCSF, and I spent most of my career at Kaiser and TPMG doing physician wellness leadership, because I was always someone, even in the beginning, who spoke up all the time about what needed to be changed and what could be better. And so when you do that, you end up in charge of solving problems. And through that work, I became involved in all kinds of physician wellness initiatives, not just in Kaiser, but nationally. And it became very much my passion. And then about 6 years ago, I discovered coaching. Not necessarily physician coaching, which is now a thing, but the idea of coaching as a performance tool, not so much just leadership coaching, but life coaching. And I came to coaching during a time when I was, in retrospect, burnt out myself, even as a wellness leader, but I was also having some challenges in my home life. I have 3 teenagers who are now young adults. And I've been married for 28 years. So I coach on all kinds of things, not just career, but families and parenting and relationships, as well as burnout and career transitions. And so I myself hired a coach who was not a physician, because I didn't know they existed, and they didn't really at the time. This was about 6 years ago, but her husband was a physician. And through that process and understanding coaching and how it works with your brain, decided that I wanted to become a coach. And so I signed up to become, to do coach training, which took about a year, still working full-time in my practice. I was also the site chief of pediatrics and the chief of physician wellness all at the same time. And ultimately I decided pre-COVID, believe it or not, that I was going to switch full-time into coaching, because that was working with physicians is really my passion and what I'm really good at. I was good at being a pediatrician, but I had also done it for 20 years and over 20 years. And so I was ready to find a new challenge. So as a little bit of background, I'm also a yoga instructor, and I do a lot of mindfulness, and I incorporate a lot of mindfulness into the coaching that I do. And I encourage you guys to develop a little bit of mindfulness practice. It's another evidence-based tool to help physicians function better, have a better life, do better in medicine, and take better care of their patients. And coaching is also an evidence-based tool. The other things that I do, which are relevant to this, is I am a leader in something called the Mindful Healthcare Collective, which is a group of about almost 2,300 physicians. It's a Facebook group and a website, and we offer all kinds of free mindfulness tools and resources and sessions, partly community and partly to teach people working in healthcare mindfulness, and because it's so helpful. And I also co-host a podcast called the Mindful Healers Podcast, which grew out of the Mindful Healthcare Collective. So those are things which are free and might be of interest. There's a lot of people who do coaching in that group and talk about a lot of this similar work, which can really help you in your career going forward. So in this first session, I'd like to talk a little bit about what coaching is. I don't know if any of you want to throw in the chat box if you know about physician coaching. I would love to know, help me know if you have any background in it. I like to think of it as a trainer for your mind. And so professional athletes all have coaches. And those of you, I know there's some critical care folks here, what you do is equally hard to being a professional athlete. And you've spent almost as many years training to do it. Your shifts are long and life or death rather than win or lose. And so we have been brought up in medicine to think that we don't need help and we don't need support and we should do it all on our own. But it turns out that when we get help, we actually perform at higher levels and our jobs are much more sustainable. And so I like to encourage people to think about it that way. You don't have to be broken. You don't have to have a problem. You can still generally get benefit. I will say most people come to coaching because there is something they're struggling with. And in medicine, there is always something we're struggling with, honestly. So I see it as like a performance tool or a happiness tool or resilience tool, whatever you want to call it. It's an engagement tool in terms of teams. And it's very different than therapy or mentoring, and it's not advice. So I give you zero advice along the way. It's really looking at your thought patterns and how they're impacting your results and your experience of fellowship and the rest of your life. And deciding, is that the experience you want to be having, or do you want to be having a different experience? And then we do some work on those thought patterns through kind of different processes and help you figure out more intentionally how you want to be showing up for what's going on. So we don't change fellowship. We don't change your attendings. We don't change your call hours, but we work on your mind so that when you experience them in a healthier way. It turns out as physicians, we have a lot of negative thought patterns that are built into our brains and by our training. And a couple of examples, just if you think about it, like scarcity mindset, we're taught to think about all the things we don't have, we might not have, what's missing. We're also taught to catastrophize and think about like the worst case scenario, which is helpful in the ICU, but it's not helpful when you think about your team or your attending or your child or your family or your life choices. And so coaching actually looks at some of those common thought patterns, and I'll try to go over a few more tonight or in the next group session if we have time. So we use coaching in medicine because it works. Essentially, we have smart brains. And so once we catch on to what's happening, we can actually use our brains for us rather than against us. Our unmanaged physician minds tend to increase burnout and send us in pathways that make us not super happy with our lives. Generally, we're always looking to make things better and fix things and control things. And it's not a recipe for a content life and a healthy experience. That's one of the reasons why we have so much burnout in medicine. I will say the other reason we have so much burnout in medicine is because the system is not good and the system is broken. And so I'm by no means saying that if you fix yourself, that's all that needs to happen. This is a tool to help you feel better and get through the challenges of working in the system as it is more easily. And also because when we show up differently, we can actually start to solve the problems of the system ourselves. And as physicians, we really need to be able to do that. Otherwise, other people are going to solve them. And so far, they haven't been able to do that. And we really need people working in the system who understand it and have the physician brain be able to do it ourselves. So one of the reasons that we offer coaching here in the fellowship is, as a pediatrician, I think in developmental phases, and it's a beautiful developmental phase in your medical career to start to do this work because you've really mastered much of the residency. You're learning new skills, but you're pretty confident in yourself as a physician. You understand your role and you understand the dynamics of the teams and things like that. And yet you're not the attending yet. And so it's the perfect time to start to look at these thought patterns and decide which ones you want to keep for the rest of your career and which ones you want to manage so that they serve you well. It's what I've discovered is I love coaching fellows because as attendings, we've been at this for 20 years. So these thought patterns are like deeply rooted and they're much harder to access and reroute. Coaching is essentially neuroplasticity, as is mindfulness. And so it's harder to do that when you've been at something for a lot longer. And so this is kind of a critical phase. It also gives you the chance to start out your career in a healthy way before you get even more burnt out, is what I'll say. I fully acknowledge that most fellows and most residents have some degree of burnout. The other thing is that fellowship is, of course, a time of tremendous stress. I've worked with a lot of critical care fellows, and you guys are under a lot of stress, a lot of death, a lot of dying, a lot of fear, anxiety, transition, a lot of communication challenges with attendings and different attendings. And stressful situations. Some of you have even been attendings and are now coming back to fellowship. And so you're now back in that sort of hierarchical system, a rung lower than you were. And that's a very difficult transition for many. So just something to realize that there's a lot of reasons to be struggling or need coaching. COVID has added to that. And this program was actually initially started as a response, if you think about anesthesiologists and critical care docs, fellows working in COVID when things were really unknown. That was the impetus for starting this program. So, and then medicine today, as I mentioned, is just not a fabulous system. And so this is a way to help support those people working in it. And I will offer that it's not something that's just being offered in fellowships and residency. Attending physicians all over are really engaging in coaching because it's really, really helpful. So I like to think of it as like preventive care or PPE for your mental health as a fellow, and just as a way to have a more sustainable career. The other piece that I bring to it is the mindfulness. And I would encourage all of you, if you've never tried it, get an app. I don't care which one. I have no money invested in any of them, and try it. Even 5 minutes can make a tremendous difference in your experience of fellowship and your resilience to the challenges that are coming up. And I use the word resilience, which is not my favorite word, but not because I want to make you resilient to solve things for other people, but resilient for yourself. So you suffer less and struggle less, and your experience is more easeful. And knowing that when we come at our work from that space, we also learn better. When we're in a high stress situation, your amygdala releases norepinephrine and cortisol, and that actually prevents you from learning. And so realizing that this work will help you learn more in your fellowship also and be a better physician. So the mindfulness is a key component of that. And what it does, if you think about like your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system, it uplevels your parasympathetic nervous system. And your sympathetic nervous system is on go, fight or flight all the time as a fellow and in anesthesia for sure. And so just realizing that you're trying to bring those into a little bit more balance, and that helps you be more resilient and more buoyant is actually the word that I like to use, because it's a little bit lighter and it's not something that's coming from above. We all want to be more buoyant in life. So those are just some background on coaching. Does anyone have specific questions about the coaching? And I'll get into a little bit about the program and how it works. Have any of you had any exposure to coaching? You can unmute if you want, or put it in the chat box, whatever.
I mean, I have like some mentors who I guess, based off your description, have done some kind of coaching, just kind of, guiding the junior physicians and people that are going through what they've been through, but nothing substantial or formal.
And the coaching is very different than mentoring. And so you should all still have your mentor. And if you have a therapist, you should also keep your therapist, because it's a very different experience. Or if you need one, sometimes I will call out that like, hey, this is not a coaching thing. You should go get support elsewhere. And there are options for that within the fellowship program. And so Bernadette can guide you, or your primary care doc can guide you. And the other thing I just wanted to distinguish is this isn't like career coaching per se, or leadership coaching or team. Sometimes coaching is like a remedial thing. It's not that at all. It's really for you kind of as a gift to figure out how you want to show up as a physician. So a lot of things that people often get, they get coached on things like people pleasing, imposter syndrome, confidence issues, communication issues. bad outcomes. And it's not like, what you should have done. It's how to sort of process them and be able to move forward with grace and compassion and resilience. And so some people have said some of the things that were the most valuable things they learned were different thought processes, alternative ones that were healthier. It's how to create thoughts that help you, to keep you from sabotaging yourself, getting yourself in trouble, in terms of making yourself more miserable than you already are. Learning to notice the thoughts that are getting in your way and causing problems, like quick and easy steps to start working on improving your life or your current situation. A lot of perspective shifting is the other sort of component of it. So the way that we've set up the program this year is there's both options for individual coaching, and then there's going to be some group coaching, though less of the group coaching this year, just because of scheduling challenges. And it's really hard when people are on call to do that. We've tried doing some during lunch, and we will keep being creative this year. So the other thing is that over the last year and a half, we found that people really, really need some private space to work on their own issues. And sometimes some of you come with issues about other fellows and communication with them. And so the one-on-one coaching offers an opportunity to address, or it might be something personal at home that you don't really want your fellows to know about. And so the way we've set it up is that each group, you're either in the critical care cohort, which is both the critical care internal medicine and critical care anesthesia. Anything that says critical care in front of it is that cohort, and that's about half of you. And then the other half is anyone in any other anesthesia fellowship. And we'll be doing 3 group coaching sessions in each of those, but separately, about quarterly for the rest of the year. And those will be set up more in line with your own schedules, probably at lunch for critical care. And I don't know, probably in the evening for the other, because they have more fixed clinic schedules. And in those sessions, I'll talk a little bit about some common issues that physicians have and thought patterns that get people into trouble. And I've done some sessions on very specific topics. And we do group coaching where someone might come with an issue and I will just start coaching them and we'll talk about it, and everyone can kind of learn from the other person, from the person who's getting coached. Group coaching is really valuable because you see pretty quickly that you're not alone and there are many shared challenges, and it really works to decrease isolation and help with burnout. And that's one of the things that the feedback said so strongly, is that you feel much less isolated when you've tried coaching, whether it's with me individually or in the group. Either one can be helpful. The group coaching is also designed to build community, knowing that some of you know each other, but not all of you know each other. And so it's very helpful, especially for some of the people in the smaller groups where there's only 3 or 4 people in, say, peds anesthesia or OB anesthesia or the different pain groups. And so being part of a bigger group, especially during COVID, where a lot of the other group activities that used to happen don't, it's a chance to build community. We know that community is protective against burnout. And so whatever ways you can find community, feel part of the community, and feel less isolated, whether it's through coaching or something else, you should definitely engage in it. Sorry. And then the individual coaching, you can schedule it directly with me, and there's a link in Bernadette's email. And we've essentially spaced it out over the whole year. So for each of those cohorts, there's about 3 to 4 sessions a month. You have access to my coaching calendar. I may, if too many, I'm trying to keep it flexible because I know that your schedules are challenging. If we get into too many people doing it all at once, I might email you back and say, hey, we have to push it off a little bit. But last year that never happened. It worked itself out over time. So I'm going to believe that it's going to work itself out over time. And it worked much better for you all to be able to schedule directly than to email me and sort of go round and round with the email. If people cannot find a time, that works on my calendar, you can feel free to just email me directly. The email's also in Bernadette's email, and just say like, I can't do any of the times on your calendar. Do you have this available or that available? And we'll, or tell me. Sometimes we'll have post call day, and that can be a way to make it work. So I'm very accessible, informal, and easy to reach. So just message me and we'll see what we can work out. You will get an email back once it's scheduled that has the Zoom link in it. And so that's the link that you will hit. The one-on-one coaching link and the group coaching link is separate. So just know that. So for your group sessions, it will always be this link. For the one-on-one sessions, it'll always be a different link. And those sessions are intended to be about 30, 40 minutes. So, and that's really about where they fell last year in that time frame. A lot of people did them from work, and that's fine, but you do want to have a private space where you can shut the door. You don't want to be doing coaching from a nurse's station or a shared workroom. You definitely want to schedule them in a time where you can sort of close yourself off and be present for it. So any thoughts or questions so far? So I think what I will do tonight for a little bit is just talk a little bit more about some of these common negative thought patterns that physicians have, so you guys can keep your eye out for them and notice how they're popping up in your own life. And I call them negative thought patterns in that they tend to cause us trouble. And we all tend to share them. And many of them are taught to us in medical school and residency. We also tend to have them, the people who tend to pursue that training at baseline, we think about it, be people pleasers and look for external validation. So two I mentioned already, which are scarcity mindset, which is seeing what we don't have and seeing what's missing and what's not going right. And this, as you can imagine, if you are always looking at the world this way, makes you feel much less satisfied and much more tired than you might otherwise feel. So keeping that in mind. Catastrophizing is thinking about the worst case scenario, which serves us well, say in the ER or the critical care unit, but doesn't serve you well on a team or with your family, or if you happen to have children, or you may notice that this pops up in lots of other places in your life outside of medicine, because these thought patterns are routed into our brain and we just go to them automatically. They're sort of short-circuited. So once you start to notice them, you can step outside of them and try to adjust them. So one of the things about bringing mindfulness into coaching is mindfulness is noticing and being aware. And most of the time in medicine, especially when you get to fellowship, things are happening on autopilot. You're like, oh, in this situation, I do this. In this situation, I do this. And so mindfulness is getting you out of that autopilot so you can make intentional decisions about how you want to show up. It lengthens that space between the stimulus and the response and that pause. And in that pause, there's a famous quote about this is where your power is. So when you're, say, reacting to something an attending said, for example, we sometimes react with a thought that makes us feel terrible. Whereas when we pause and we reconsider, we're like, huh, maybe it doesn't mean that. Well, let me see, how do I want to respond? And you can shift your experience in a very different way. So some other common thought patterns that tend to get us into trouble is hard is better. More is better, struggling is better. And if you think about residency, that's often the conversation, you know, how many patients came in last night? If you're working really hard, we make that a point of pride. And more leadership positions, more roles, more patients, doing more is always considered better in medicine, but not necessarily is it better for your health or your wellness or your family. And if you're thinking about sleep, we actually don't think more sleep is better, but we think the struggle and the heart is better. And so it's like, oh, I haven't slept in days. We say that with a point of pride. And so the idea is to really consider, how do you want to choose to be thinking about these things? People pleasing is when we want everyone to like us, and it's trained into us in medicine we want all of our attendings to like us and give us good feedback. We are all A+ students generally, so we want people to give us feedback that way. We like external validation. We like good grades. We like feedback. We like written stuff. What you'll discover when you get to be an attending is you start to get very little of that. And people tend to get frustrated and not feel as good about it. And so part of coaching is to learn to give yourself internal validation and realize that you are enough as you are, as often what we talk about in coaching. And we've very much been taught to think we're not enough all along the way. You don't know enough. You haven't done enough. And so your brain takes that with you into the rest of your life. And it's like, I don't know enough. I haven't done enough. I have to study more. I have to do this. And it's kind of a fear-based way to live your life. And it leads to a lot of burnout. And for those of you that don't know what burnout is essentially emotional exhaustion, cynicism about your job in medicine, and then feeling ineffectual or feeling like you're not doing a good job. And those feed on one another. And so a lot of these negative thought patterns that I'm mentioning they lead to burnout. They lead you to feeling ineffectual, right? If you are coming from a scarcity mindset, you're noticing everything that's going wrong, everything that could go wrong, you're looking for external validation all the time, you end up burnt out, essentially. So other thought patterns that physicians have that can get us into trouble are things like wanting to control and fix everything. We do that very well, especially those of you in the ICU. You like to fix and monitor and control absolutely every button and drip and this and that. And so when things are happening that are out of your control, it can make you quite uncomfortable. And so we often try to tap back into that control and fixing everything in places where maybe things are out of our control. And so just realizing where it's helping you and where it's not, and where you pop into that, those thought patterns when you're not in the hospital, and how might it serve you better to not use those thought patterns outside the hospital. Sometimes even in the hospital, it's not helping you. Comparitis, I like to call it, where we look at everyone else and they're doing this and they're doing that better than me, and this is happening to this person. We're trained to see the world through that lens in medicine. And so just notice how often you're comparing yourself to others to see if you measure up. And we don't compare ourselves to who we were 3 months ago and look at all that I've learned and accomplished. We only look at, Neil looks at David, David looks at Neil, right? And he's like, well, he does this and I don't know this. And we always end up feeling inadequate and burning ourselves out, like trying to be the other person, not realizing that you're good at one thing and the other person's good at something else. And so really just noticing how often you pop into that. And then imposter syndrome is super common in almost every fellow, thinking that like, I don't know why they took me. I don't know why I'm here. Everyone else must know more than me. And what's fascinating is everyone has it. And so they took all of you for a reason, but we're always sure they made a mistake. And if you're not, fantastic, but it pops up along the way, right? Every level we get to a new level, and those questions can pop up. They also pop up frequently as you get towards the end of the year and you're thinking about transitioning to an attending. I don't know enough. And sort of fears about catastrophizing what might happen. There's a lot of pre-anticipatory anxiety in physicians, and we like pre-call thinking about all the things that could happen. And so we end up not sleeping well the night before, or we end up being miserable on Sunday night for our jobs on Monday, for example. And so we end up giving away a lot of the time off that we have thinking about work and ruminating about things that maybe happened at work. Maybe you had a procedure that didn't go well. And we pretty much make it mean that we're not a good doctor. Everyone's looking at us. What did we do wrong? And even when you did nothing wrong, we have a really hard time tapping out of that. So say, for example, like an epidural, if you had trouble getting an epidural in, I learned last year that 1 in 20 epidurals doesn't go in, right? So what if that's just the 1 in 20 that doesn't go in, and it's not actually anything about you or your skill or your talent, right? But along the way, we make it about us, and it's almost always not about us. Like maybe that patient had different anatomy, or who knows what happened. But we tend to ruminate and make it mean these long-term catastrophic things about our career in medicine, and did we make not a good choice, and all of these interesting things. And so coaching looks at these thought patterns, notices them, calls them them out and helps you come up with different thought patterns. So for the, if it's the 1 in 20 that's not going to go in, that's a very different thought than I shouldn't be a doctor anyway, right? Which is a lot of what happens to people when there's an issue. So those are just sort of a few. The other thing I wanted to touch on tonight is shame, which is a really difficult issue for many, many physicians. And if you pause to think about it, and you don't have to do it here in the group, but in your own space, how often shame pops up? Shame that you didn't know something, shame that something didn't go well. We pop into shame all the time. And we use this concept of shame to push ourselves forward and push ourselves to do more and push ourselves to do more and push ourselves to do more. And yet, what shame does is it shuts down the amygdala, like I talked about before. You release norepinephrine and cortisol and you don't learn from it. So say you have shame about a bad outcome or shame about something someone said on rounds, something you didn't know, for example. You end up, when you tap into these feelings of shame, not doing the learning that you need and not being able to turn it around into something that serves you and serves the next patient who you encounter or the next team that you're on where something similar happens. And so if you can come to a place of self-compassion, which I know is incredibly difficult for most physicians, compassion releases oxytocin, which is a feel-good hormone, and you learn a lot more and you grow in that scenario. And so I work with a lot of people in coaching. I don't start with trying to just force self-compassion on you, because I know that for many of you, that's a really challenging space to get to, but just maybe not being mean to yourself is where we start. And then the second one is like, can you be kind to yourself without, you get to self-compassion later. But that just being kind to yourself and not being mean to yourself is a brilliant space to start. And it's a space where more learning can happen. Does that resonate? Any of that resonate with all of you? Shaking heads, yes. Okay. I think what I'll do, let me turn the recording off and you guys can ask questions, or I can also do a little coaching if anyone is brave enough to be struggling with something already.